Hey guys, I had a couple of folks message me and asked me for some information, and I guess I thought maybe some of this stuff was self-explanatory, but it's, if you're new to it and maybe you don't understand it, maybe I can explain some things and help you understand it, and at the same time help some of these guys that are getting their meals and may not understand how to set all this stuff or adjust everything on these LX25s. Maybe it'll help you figure out how to adjust it. As I've said before, I don't work for Woodmizer. I'm not a professional. I'm a hobby sawyer. I did grow up in a garage, so my dad was a mechanic his entire life, so I've got a little bit of mechanical knowledge. Not an expert. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to tell you is stuff that I've done, that I've learned, that I've figured out, or maybe I saw somebody, somebody somewhere on the internet explain it, and I'm just passing it on to you guys. And I do this just so maybe I can help you figure it out, and so it's not so frustrating, because I love this stuff. I really do enjoy sawmilling and making things, and I think it's awesome to be able to watch a log go from a log that somebody wanted out of the yard so they didn't have to burn it to lumber and projects and all the cool things that you can make. I think it's a good thing for the environment. You're not wasting resources that good Lord put here. You're putting it to use, and I just think that's a cool thing. So trying to share my knowledge and what little bit I have, and try to make somebody else's life a little easier. So what I'm going to go over today is, if you're having problems with either your measurement not being accurate on your mill, not knowing how to set it up, or you're putting it together and you're trying to figure out how exactly to make sure you know how thick you're cutting your lumber, I'm going to walk through the entire steps, everything I can think of, and explain it to you. And if I miss something, if you want to message me like some guys did about making this video, then feel free. If I get time, I'll try to make the video. I do work a full-time job. This is my hobby. So after I get off work, I do these things. But we're going to go over a few things, and pardon my movement of the camera. I do not have a cameraman. It's just me. I built this building by myself. I mill my wood by myself. I'm a one-man show, and that's all I got. So I'm making do with what I got, and I've got a tripod and a camera. So we're going to do the best we can with that today. But this is the chart. And I'm going to go over this for the ones of you that don't know. The right side of this chart is simply a measuring stick. It is a 22.5-inch measuring stick. That's all that is, okay? When you set this thing, you got to remember that this is basically your bunks. The top of this thing, like right here, wherever the measurement stops, that is your bunks. So when you're looking at this measurement from here to whatever this says, above that is below your blade. And it can be confusing, but that's how it works. From here down is actually, if you took this thing and flipped it on its head, that would make more sense. But this is going to be your bunks, and the distance between here and the top edge of this thing, the top edge of this is basically the bottom edge of your blade. You have to take into consideration the kerf. The average blade is going to run somewhere around 1/8 of an inch kerf. If it's really flat, maybe you get a 16th, but I don't think that's going to happen. Most of your teeth are offset from the blade, so as they go through the log, they're making about 1/8 of an inch channel. The more set, the more chatter you got on the blade, the wider that crack's going to be. But general rule of thumb, everybody says 1/8 of an inch. So with that said, right now, if you look, I've got the top of edge of this piece of metal here. You can barely see the line on the one protruding above that piece of metal. All right, this piece of metal is kind of like the red line. If you wanted to paint that red to make it look more like a gauge in your car or whatever, I guess you could. But that right there, the top edge of that, basically indicates the bottom edge of the blade. So we're going to look down here. So when you look at the bottom of your blade here, this little guy that they send you from Woodmizer that I couldn't figure out what it was used for. I finally figured it out, but I didn't really like the way it worked, so I kept it because it's exactly 1 inch wide. If you take, I've got my mill set for 1 inch, and you take this thing and put it on the bunks, it's 1 inch all the way across there. Now I'm not holding this perfectly level, so it's kind of moving a little bit, but that's 1 inch. Okay, if you look on the chart here, I've still got a 3/4 left. You might as well go ahead and paint that white. put an X on it, whatever. You're never going to use that 3 unless you're adventurous. And the reason being, these stops right here that are on the Woodmizer mill that you use to hold your cants once you get them squared out, those guys sit at right at 3/4 of an inch. So if you were to try to cut that, one, I'm pretty sure you'd cut the tops off of them, which I guess you'd only hit them once. And two, that doesn't give you a whole lot of room to play with in the event that you have a blade dive or something on your last cut, and you don't want to dive into a whole bunch of metal and wreck your blades. So typically Woodmizer advertised that your last cut is going to be 1 inch. So there's really no reason for that 3 to be on there. That chart, they should probably just take that 3 off, paint it white, whatever you want to do. But one thing that I will add, and I'm going to have to stop the camera and move it to be able to show you this, is when you're setting this thing up, how to make sure it's square and where the adjustments are for the carriage to get that 1 inch consistency from the left side of the blade to the right. So give me just a minute. I'm going to pause the camera and move over there, get it set up, and I'll be right back. Alright guys, we've gotten down here a little lower, so we're going to go over the adjustments. And when you're setting your mill up, if it's brand new and you just cut the plastic off of it and you're putting it together and getting ready to cut some wood, this is something that you may want to know. I didn't have much luck finding videos to tell me when I had mine. I just had to figure it out. Luckily, like I said, these things kind of come naturally to me with my upbringing from being raised in the garage. So, but here we go. Like I said, this guy right here, don't throw it away. Even though you don't know how to use it, don't throw it away, because it's a good gauge for 1 inch. You can set this guy in here and it'll tell you, you know, where 1 inch is, and works pretty well. So we're set at 1 inch on my gauge right now, and we're down here in the mill. And if you look right there, you can see on that blade barely misses that stop right there by maybe 1/4 of an inch. So that's why I don't recommend trying to go down to 3/4 of an inch under any circumstances. You just know that anytime you cut in lumber, your last board is going to be at least 1 inch thick. Sometimes you may want to go ahead and knock it off 1.5 inches and get you know, a 2x out of it, so to speak. Once you've got your cables attached to this bar right here, there's set screws on there that you can attach those cables to get it relatively close. Up top, you have the long bolt here that is used to pull that cable up or down. If one side of your mill is 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch higher than the other, then you should have enough adjustment here that you can adjust that and get it to where it is even on the left side and on the right side. Okay, so once you've done that, then you know it's square, you know it's even, it's good. So what you want to do is make sure you're on your 1 inch setting. And like I said, the indicator is going to be right below the number that you're trying to cut to. So like the indicator, I'm going to have that line just above the black indicator up top. This is at 1 inch. One thing that I didn't know about, and it took me a minute to figure it out, is when you're putting your mill together, you're going to see these long bolts right here. These bolts are longer for a reason, and it took me a while to comprehend why. But if you let those bolts down until they contact the bottom of the carriage, it won't allow your carriage to drop so low that you're hitting here where this piece of metal is, or you're hitting those guys. And so even if you're not paying attention and you drop down and try to make that last 3/4 inch cut because you didn't black out that measurement on your gauge up there, it won't let you. So these are a good idea. Once you get it set to 1 inch, come down here, adjust these things out until they touch, and that'll prevent you from going further than the 1 inch, and it'll keep you from hitting these stops here. So there's bolts on both sides. You've got 4 of them. It really only takes 1 to stop the carriage. So if you notice, my other 2 are not touching, but these are the ones that stop it. So we're gonna go back up to the top, and I'm going to walk through the measurements and the best that I understand it. So give me just a minute and we'll move the camera. Alright guys, back up top. That's your friendly little gauge. Like I said, this 3/4 right here on a Woodmizer LX25, you can disregard that guy. You won't be using that one. And just so everybody understands, like I said, this is a measuring stick. So from here to the top of this measurement, that's going to be from the bottom edge of your blade to the deck. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to raise this thing up a little bit and show you some more. All right. These measurements right here, the 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, and 8/4. Basically, that's exactly what it says, 3/4 of an inch, which means they've accounted on this first measurement. You'll notice it is exactly at 3/4 of an inch. Same thing with this guy. It's exactly 4/4 is exactly 1 inch. 5/4 is exactly 1 1/4 inches. 6/4 is exactly 1 1/2 inches, and then 8/4 is exactly 2 inches. The way that this scale works, this scale is basically for those of us like myself who aren't that great at math and love to mill. So they've tried to take some of the math out of it. You've got to take into consideration this thing. We're going to say that this is, I haven't measured it, but we're going to say that this is about 1/8 of an inch right here on this blade, which is probably pretty close. So, but when you go to the next 3/4 board, 3/4 plus 3/4 should be, if you do proper math, 1 1/2 inches. But if you'll notice, the next 3/4 here is actually 1 5/8 inches. And you're asking yourself, well, why is that? Because if you stop if you're milling, you make your first cut. When you make that cut, from the bottom edge of your blade up is going to be 3/4 of an inch. But the blade had to go through the log to cut that board. And so where the blade went through that log to cut that board, you've turned 1/8 of an inch of that board into sawdust, and it ends up in that pile over there. So when you drop down to cut your next board, if you don't take into consideration that you just turned 1/8 of an inch of that board into sawdust, your next cut, if you cut at 1 1/2 inches, is not going to be 1 1/2 inches. It's going to be 1 3/8 inches, because your other 1/8 of an inch is sawdust. So that's why, if you'll notice, every time you drop down to another 3/4 of an inch board, they're adding another 1/8 of an inch to the measurement. And so after that first board, once you cut that first board, from that point forward, it's not going to fall directly on 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch or 1 1/2 inches. You've got to add that 1/8. So what this does is basically, if you drop down and you line up your gauge to where it's sitting like this, and we'll move mine down so that I can show you. It's a little dry, needs a little WD-40 on it. If you drop down to right there and you make that cut, this first board you cut is 3/4 of an inch, and then the second board you cut is 3/4 of an inch. You have just produced 1/4 of an inch of sawdust, because you created 1/4 of an inch here, or 1/8 of an inch here, and 1/8 of an inch here. So that kind of would explain it, and surely you can figure it out from there. Basically, if you use these marks and you line those lines up, underneath that line, you line it up with the top edge of this piece of metal right here, and you follow that chart all the way to the bottom, all of your boards should be 3/4 of an inch thick. Now, is it perfect? Is it exact? Are you going to be able to get them exact every single cut? Possibly not. But there's another trick, that if you're not confident that you're reading this scale correctly, and you don't know that you're doing it right, and like I said, the way I explained it with the 3/4, it works all the way across. 8/4 is a 2-inch thick board. And if you can actually count how many boards you'll get out of a log, like I said, don't forget, you're not going to get that, this last 3/4, you're not going to get that. So like I said, you can pretend that one's not there. The way to get on this scale when you're cutting a log, and we'll go over this, is at some point, when you're cutting, at some point, you're going to have to make a determination. I'm going to cut this log into 3/4 boards, or 4/4 boards, or 5/4. Once you make that determination, after you've squared it out into a can, or during the process, however you choose to do it, you're going to have to start lining up. If we're wanting to make 3/4 inch boards, you're going to have to get one. You're going to have to get one of your cuts lined up with this 3/4 inch board. So you may have to cut a 1/4 inch piece of wood. You may have to cut a 1 inch piece of wood, 1 1/4, or you can do it when you're actually forming your cant, which is what I usually do, is when I'm on that last cut to that side, I'll go ahead and determine, you know, because it's going to be, when you start dropping your boards, typically that's going to be, you've already determined you want them 6 inches wide, which you can do using this ruler here if you're doing 6-bys, because this measures from the bottom of your blade to your bunks. So if you just made a cut doing your cant and you're here, that's a 13-inch high cant. If you flip that sideways, now you're cutting 13-inch wide boards. So when you flip that thing over and you start making cuts, you need to determine, do I need to be on a 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, or where do I need to be on the scale? And then pick one, line your cut up, make that cut. Every additional cut that you make, you line up the next mark. And as you progress, you should be cutting, like I said, as long as you're consistent with where your line is and you get everything lined up right. If you lean down, if you're taller like I am, if you're short, you're gonna have to overcome that. But I'm close to 6'1", so it's about right for me. But I have to kind of squat down just a little bit and line that line up to where I can barely see that line across the top of this piece of metal right here. And if I do that consistently, then my boards come out 3/4 of an inch. So that's how that works. That's my best understanding that I can share with you. I will say that until you get comfortable with it, and until you know, if it's something that you really care about, making sure that it's exactly right, my recommendation to you is use the scale. That way you build confidence in the scale and you know that this is what it is and this is where it's going to be. But put one of these in your pocket and I will show you why this is the best tool that you can have in your pocket when you're milling. So if you have a cant, you can lay this guy on the cant, and then when you roll your carriage forward, you can look at where that blade is resting on this measurement here, and if it's sitting on 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch or 1.5 inches to the top of the blade, keep in mind top of the blade when you're doing a cut, because the top of the blade up is where your board's going to be. So right here, from this will set on your cant, and if your blade pulls up here and the top of your blade is sitting just below that, maybe a 1/16 of an inch below 1.5 inches, then that board's going to be 1.5 inches thick. And I use this speed square religiously because it helps me to make sure that my cuts are where I want them, and I also use it to make sure my cants are square. When I'm putting it on the bunks, you can use it, you can set it down here and make sure that your cant is right before you clamp, and when you're putting your clamp on. So, you know, I recommend one of these guys. This one's not the best one. I've got a black one with white letters that I like much better, but this one's got a little bit of a crack in it and it gets beat up here to mill sometimes, and so I leave it up here. But anyway, I hope that helps you. And if anybody had a problem using the measurements, maybe I've explained it good enough, and hopefully I didn't tell you anything that wasn't true. Everything I'm telling you, I've learned. Like I said, it's not exactly the best way maybe, but it's my way. It's the way I do, and it works for me. So I appreciate it. And like I said, go out and get yourself one of these. Keep it in your pocket, hang it on your mill or whatever. But it's really handy. It works for measuring your cuts, because typically, if you're going to cut anything, it's not going to be, you know, that often you cut bigger than 6 inches thick, and that little lip right there makes it sit on that cant perfectly. So that's the tip of the day right there. Speed square. Thank you, and everybody have a good day. If you like my videos, or if you've got an LX25 and you're trying to figure out how to work it, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I post a lot of videos with LX25, and I'll keep posting. If you've got something else that you have a question about, send me a message, and I'll try to come up with a video if I can help you. If not, I'll research it until I can. Thank you, and have a good day.